On today's show, it is the week of the NBA draft. Only a few days remain before the big day arrives. We'll get into the latest intel, the rumors, where things all stand, and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1746 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday morning. It is the week of the NBA draft, and there is a lot going on in Hawksland and across the league. Today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. This summer, FanDuel is looking up all of their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I want to also encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe to the Locked On Hawks podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. That includes YouTube, where you can also like the podcast each and every episode, plus Apple, Spotify, Overcast, etc. on the audio side. And I said it once before, I'll say it again now. I'm going to try to timestamp basically every episode for the foreseeable future, because the next couple of weeks in particular are the time where nothing is really able to be held. There's always a risk of news breaking and all that stuff. It's kind of a bonus podcast of sorts. I don't often record on Sunday morning and publish on Sunday morning, but because there is so much going on and I'm trying to give you as much content as possible, I am coming to you Sunday morning here just a few days before the NBA draft. Probably a little bit of a shorter show as well, but there's some intel to get into. I got some mailbag questions. I didn't want to go too long without a podcast, but I do want to plug at the top of the show. It has been absolutely wall-to-wall with regard to episodes in recent days. We had Ben Pfeiffer on the show for a two-part episode. That's the most recent one in this podcast feed. Sam Vecini came on the show last week of The Athletic, and Sam has a massive NBA draft guide out now at The Athletic. Ricky O'Donnell, Brian Schroeder, Stone Hansen, Bryce, two different Bryces, Bryce Hendricks and Bryce Simon, wall-to-wall stuff, plus player capsules from Glenn Willis, et cetera, et cetera. It has been very busy, and it will still be that way. So thanks for joining us on today's podcast. We'll dive in right now with the latest on the intel side. Again, this is Sunday morning as I'm recording this podcast. In the last few days, I guess pretty much most of this stuff is going to be revolving around the number one overall pick in the draft for obvious reasons. The aforementioned Sam Vecini wrote on Thursday that, quote, league sources continue to get the impression that Atlanta is open for offers for the right deal, end quote, to move down in the draft. But with that said, Jake Fisher of Yahoo, who's been on this podcast many times before, Jake's a friend of mine, wrote on Friday that the Hawks will list the number one overall, but they are also willing to hold firm and have not finalized who they're going to pick at this juncture. A little bit different there. Also, Jake reiterated on a podcast appearance with Nate Duncan of Dunked On that in the reporting basically points to the Hawks sticking number one overall as the most likely outcome. I will always say this. I'll probably say it again later this week if nothing happens. Always the most likely outcome is a team sticking at the spot they are currently at, especially at number one. There are very few historic examples of number one pick trades. Now, this year is definitely very different. The value of the pick is lower this year because of the class and all that stuff, but usually teams tend to stay there, and that is probably still the most likely outcome for the Hawks. With that said, the other big thing is that Jake wrote is that at this point, this is a quote from Jake, most team personnel picking in the slots behind Atlanta believe the Hawks will ultimately choose between Zachary Risacher and Donovan Clingan, end quote. So one thing to note always here, and keep in mind, is the wording, which is about teams and other teams, not the Hawks, personnel elsewhere, believing something. That is not direct intel from the Hawks. I'm not picking on Jake. He's doing his job reporting this, but there's a difference between direct intel from Atlanta and rival executives or other teams, etc. Keep that in mind. But the more high-profile thing there, of course, is that it notably omits Alex Sarr. And something I was told from two different people independently in the last week, even before Jake wrote this, is that they will be fairly surprised if the pick is Alex Sarr at number one overall. No one has said that it definitely won't be Alex Sarr. Keep that in mind. Surprise and definite, not the same thing. But there is some real, I would say, skepticism at this point in time that the Hawks are going to pick Alex Sarr number one overall. Again, that's just out there in the ether. Maybe the Hawks are smoke screening, etc. Fisher did talk on his podcast over at Yahoo alongside Dan Devine this week that basically there is some buzz about Alex Sarr's agency, WME, and his agent, Bill Duffy, not wanting him in Atlanta, whether it's the player side or the agent side or both. Keep in mind, Jake was not forceful or defiant, anything like that about this topic. It was not a huge focus of the discussion. But the rumblings been out there for a little while. Jake also wrote the next day in his Yahoo column that the Wizards are, quote, considered the preferred outcome from Sarr's camp. Of course, Washington picks number 2 overall. We'll come back to that in a second. I have mentioned, though, on this show multiple times in the last few weeks that this sentiment has been kind of out there as far as Sarr maybe not being enthused about being in Atlanta. Keep in mind, no one's reported that they would refuse to show up, anything like that. But it's been kind of in the ether that Sarr does not want to come to Atlanta on some level. Now, this does not mean you can't take him. There are two different things here. A lot of the pushback has been when I've said this on the podcast or elsewhere that, just take him anyway. Okay, I'm not saying you can't do that. And if he is the guy that the Hawks viewed as the number 1 player in this class by any kind of clear margin, I think you just take him. Now, that's a big if. I'm not saying that's the Hawks' belief, but if the Hawks just viewed him as the clear best player, you don't pass because the guy does not want to be here necessarily. It would, though, explain the reported difficulty with getting a workout with Alex Sarr. That would explain some of that. Jake's not getting into his reasoning here, so this is not him saying this, to be clear, but I have heard from more than one person that it has to do with the belief from Sarr's side somewhere that he is not a center full-time and does not really want to be a center. And the way he plays, as I've discussed many times on offense in particular right now, is that of a guy who might not want to play center. So there's potential overlap there if a team like the Hawks view Jalen Johnson, like they actually do, as their full-time 4. There's nuance there. I'm not saying that's the right belief. I'm not making that argument myself, but that is kind of out there in the ether that could be part of the reason why he doesn't want to come to Atlanta. There's some history with Philadelphia as well. He was the lead agent with Luka, for instance. I don't think that's a huge part of this, to be honest with you, but it could be. I'm not ruling that out by any means either. So maybe that is why Clingan and Risa Shea are viewed as the front runners right now. And I say maybe on purpose. Maybe the Hawks just don't love Alex Sarr. That is very much a possibility. Maybe it's an elaborate smokescreen for whatever reason. The Hawks really do like Alex Sarr, and they're trying to throw people off the scent or whatever. I don't know. All of that is in play, but I'm just passing on what has been reported at this point in time about what is out there, and that is that the Hawks are leaning towards, reportedly, Risa Shea or Clingan, and not Sarr, and that Sarr's camp, reportedly, wants to be in Washington. All that's out there. Now, I got questions from some listeners as a result of this, unsurprisingly, about whether it could be like an indictment of the Hawks, that someone like Sarr, who isn't even a consensus number 1 overall pick, like it's not like it's an absolute lock that he was going to go there regardless. I've been saying since the lottery not to just assume it was Sarr and nobody else. That was never the case. But, is it an indictment of the Hawks that he's trying to angle away from Atlanta, knowing that there is a drop in prestige at number 1 overall and also a loss of money to not go number 1 overall? It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a lot of money. So, for one, I haven't heard that's the reason, like anything about the Hawks organization. I think it's basketball related, probably more likely than organization related, especially because the Wizards, who I said before I want to come back to, are picking second. And yes, they're not exactly a juggernaut. In fact, my favorite stat maybe in the whole league is that the Wizards have not won 50 games since a year that began with a 197. Since the 70s, they have not won 50 games in a season. That's not a joke. Even people that I know that follow the Wizards closely or cover the Wizards are kind of taken aback by a top prospect actively seeking out Washington, seemingly. So that's part of this. But look, it gives me no pleasure to say this out loud, but I've said it before, but there is some skepticism around the league, I would say, about the Hawks with their leadership brain trust right now. This is a front office that has not had a long record of activity, like nothing hugely negative with this group, I'm talking about Landry, Kyle, etc. But there has been plenty of reporting the last couple of years about the front office kind of being a bit of a mess, about the DeJounte trade, the way that Travis Schlenk was ousted, the Nick Ressler factor, cooks in the kitchen everywhere, Tony Ressler, all that stuff. Tony's a very active owner. He's not been also willing to spend big. So that combination of like mandating things or maybe come close to that and also not willing to spend. Lots of different stuff going on in the Hawks front office, at least reportedly. I'll stop with that. But if you did a consensus organizational leadership ranking right now, if you included ownership and front office, the Hawks would not be near the top of that list around the league. It doesn't mean they're right, but I wouldn't say the consensus. There is a belief in some circles around the league that the Hawks are kind of a weird situation right now. I'm not saying that's my opinion. I'm not trying to make a hot take or that it has anything to do with Sarr. But because people were asking me why that would be the case, could this be the reason why? There are folks in the league who don't really buy what the Hawks are selling right now. And I'm not sure if that means anything, or I'm sure it does mean something, but when it comes to ownership structure, front office, the trust there, I've mentioned decision fatigue in the past. The last couple of years, the Hawks have just kind of like not done much of anything, which you could argue in a vacuum is not the worst idea. But there's this weird kind of like holding pattern. And even number one overall pick, like I don't personally have a lot of frustration with the Hawks not being settled on number one right now. But I know a lot of Hawks fans are like baffled or confused or frustrated by the Hawks being kind of the team that's not sure what they're going to do here. Even people that I know and trust that usually get a lot of intel are kind of like shrugging on the Hawks right now. And by the way, that can be a good thing. Maybe the Hawks are actually not leaking a lot. And that's, for me, if I'm a Hawks fan, I don't want my team to leak. I know it's easier to have like rumor stuff, but it's probably better process-wise to not leak. So I'll stop for now. But last thing before I get to a break, on the other side of this, if I was Alex Sarr's agent, I would actively want Alex Sarr to go to Atlanta. Now, hear me out. For one, I think Alex Sarr mostly is going to be a 5, or at least partially going to be a 5 in the near term, maybe in the long term. Near term, maybe more of a 4 out of necessity. But I think if I'm Alex Sarr and I'm a limited offensive player, which I believe that he is, I think a guard like Trae Young in particular would be really, really valuable in unlocking what he could possibly be on offense. Also, you have the reality that the number one overall pick makes the most money, but Sarr is a highly dependent offensive player. And he has a lot of questions on offense. I have Alex Sarr number one on my board. I said that before on my overall board. He's number one. So I'm not saying he's a bad prospect because he's not. But offensively, there's a lot of question marks there. And no matter what you think about Trae, I know there's a lot of people that don't buy the Trae experience. I'm not even telling you to do that right now. It is undeniable, however, that he has been fantastic for big men when it comes to making their lives easier on offense and helping them get numbers and efficiency. That is undeniable. Dating back to when he first arrived with guys like Alex Len and Dwayne Dedmon, going through John Collins, Capela, Okongwu, the list goes on and on. He has always been good for bigs. And Alex Sarr is a big. Now, whether he's a 4 or 5, whatever, he's still a big. And I think that for me, unlocking Alex Sarr would be helpful to have Trae Young next to him if I'm Alex Sarr's agent. But alas, that's just me. Okay, I went long on that, but let's just say it is a big unknown right now. The reporting that's been out there from Jake, I don't think I mentioned Mark Stein, but he's reported similarly. The thought around the league right now, as of Sunday morning, is that it's Ricochet versus Klingon at number one overall. They could be smoke screening, but that is the reporting out there, and that Sarr wants to go to Washington, and we'll update that as we get more information. Okay, I do have more to get to on this podcast, as well as like some follow-up from maybe another rumbling around a trade down. The impact of Malik Monk, by the way. That's a weird topic, but I promise you I'm going to tie it back to the Hawks. A new hire from Atlanta, and also a Clint Capela trade rumor at this point, always pseudo-trade rumor at this point in time. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion driving patience with forming winning championships. That's also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and also level it up to peak performance. They have roof racks, they have exhaust kits, they have LED headlights, they have superchargers. Whatever you are looking for in the automobile space, they can have it for you, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered across the board. They have over 122 million parts for number one ride or die, and you will always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. And they also have eBay Guaranteed Fit, and that means your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back guarantee coming back to you. And because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, and of course, you're never burning any cash with eBay Motors. With all the parts that you need at the price that you're looking for, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And summertime means baseball, basketball, and much more. You can bet it all at FanDuel Sportsbook. And FanDuel is America's number one sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everybody, every day, all summer long. Bet on all of your favorite players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app is really easy to use at FanDuel Sportsbook, and they have everything you're looking for in the sports betting space. Over-unders, player props, money lines, future bets, point spreads. It's all there for you at FanDuel Sportsbook. The app is safe. It's secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and much more. And now is the best time. Sign with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, and I won't try to do an exhaustive deep dive into all of the rumblings and roster machinations. I am planning to do like a final solo episode, probably that will drop on the morning of the draft, Wednesday morning, or at least Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, with like kind of more of a roundup, more of a broad strokes look. And yes, the Hawks have decisions to make, big ones, about Trey DeJounte, about the center spot. All that stuff is still out there. The Andre Hunter trades, that stuff's been out there, etc. But not going to do all that today, but it's a lot of that in the archive and more to come. Anyway, Mark Stein actually wrote on Saturday, and the final thing on this podcast about number one overall, he wrote that there are, quote, rumbles about San Antonio interest jumping from number four to number one by constructing a trade with the Hawks, and that they have not gone away, end quote. Again, I'm not reporting that's going to happen. It is kind of out there. San Antonio might be looking to jump up either for Sarr or for Risa Shea. I'm not sure which at this point in time. There isn't a lot. I would say there's not like an active rumor out there about a team trying to trade up. I do think, once again, the Hawks would be willing to trade down. All I have on that. That's kind of my plain response. They would be willing to trade down if they got an enticing offer. This is kind of a weird topic, but stay with me. The Kings of Sacramento, of course, kept Malik Monk on a 4-year deal in the last couple of days. Why am I bringing it up on the Hawks podcast the week of the draft? Well, I think it's objectively good news for the Hawks. Now, it hasn't come up for about 2 months now because the pick did not convey this year when the Kings lost in the play-in. But Sacramento owes a first-round pick to Atlanta, as a reminder. It's now top 12 protected for next year, 2025. And the Hawks will be rooting for the Kings to either make the playoffs or at least be the 9 seed in the West and have that pick convey either 13, 14, 15, 16, something like that. That would be a nice thing for the Hawks to have happen. It is far from a lock at this point that the Kings make the playoffs. A lot has to happen. It's June. But Sacramento was a playoff level team last year. They won 46 games. They had a +2 net rating or so. They weren't great, but they were playoff level. I'm actually not the biggest Malik Monk fan, but he is a good player, full stop. And there was a real threat that he might leave because the Kings were limited on what they could actually offer him because of CBA stuff that I won't go into now. But they offered him the max they could, and there's always some positive leverage from that. Like, as a reminder, the Hawks did similar with DeJounte Murray, where like the whole league, including the Hawks, honestly, were a little surprised that DeJounte took that extension. But there is some power as the team in just saying, look, DeJounte, or in this case, Malik Monk, we are offering you the most we can possibly offer you legally under the CBA. And with Monk, they did that. He took it, and there you go. Obviously, I won't go deep into that now, but with the Hawks not controlling their next 3 first-round picks after that, unprotected 25, swap the next year, and then again in 27, it would be very nice for Atlanta to have that pick convey, and this would, just broadly speaking, help with that effort because Monk makes the Kings better. There's no like worry about a drop-off there as far as the guard play is concerned, and that's a positive moment, even if not a huge one for the Hawks. One more news item. The Hawks are going to be hiring Ben Peterson as their VP of Player Health and Performance. Now, this is originally broken by actually an NFL guy, Tom Pelissero on NFL Network, and he reported that. I was able to confirm it on Friday morning and report it myself because, and the reason why it was broken by this person, is that Peterson was formerly the 49ers of the NFL head of Player Health and Performance. He oversaw athletic training and nutrition, strength stuff, etc. for the Niners for like the last 4 or 5 years. I know there's always a desire to kind of dig into a hire like this from the outside and figure out if it's a good idea. Broadly speaking, I would say it's very hard to know anything about that unless you are like really plugged into the league in a way that fans can't be. Even I will raise my hand and be like, I don't know if this is going to be a good hire. I made some calls on this. People seem to be okay with it from what I heard around the league, but there's always a little bit of a uncertainty angle with someone changing sports in this case. In particular, I saw some fans going into like articles about the 49ers having injuries and stuff. I wouldn't worry about that too much right now from the outside. Worth bringing up, I guess, at some point in time. But that's the Hawks. That's the latest news on the Hawks front. They are hiring Peterson. That was confirmed to me. I did ask around. It's pretty much a wait and see. And I just wanted to pass that along because it's not been announced yet by the Hawks, but I was able to confirm that with someone who would know from Atlanta. And that's going to be happening. At least probably will be announced in the near future. And the last thing before we get out of here is a couple days old now, but it's also relevant. So Matt Moore, who is a friend of mine, candidly, formerly of CBS, now of Action Network. He's HP Basketball on Twitter, if you are wondering who that might be. He wrote in his Intel column that 4 teams have, quote, expressed interest, end quote, in Clint Capela. Now, that's not a huge surprise. Capela has been out there as far as trade stuff for a while now. Of course, last summer was prominently out there. I think Jake Fisher referenced Capela in at least his writing and or a podcast with Nate Duncan. Like, have no fear. If you are someone who wants Capela traded, like all that stuff, put that aside. Capela is available in trade. Now, they're not going to give him away, just like last summer, but he's available in trade. But 4 teams are the Grizzlies, the Wizards, the Pelicans, and the Bulls. They were all reported to have expressed interest. Again, that's the phrase that Matt used in Capela. We don't know how much interest, when that interest was, or whether there is still interest from any of this 4. But each of the 4 teams make some sense to some degree. I won't go super deep here, but the big thing is Capela would be the best center on any of those 4 teams right now. So it's fairly logical through that lens that they would at least check in with the Hawks on him. There are 3 of the 4 teams that are like kind of at least trying to win, maybe the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, and maybe the Bulls, after the Bulls did a controversial trade this week with Alex Caruso and Josh Giddey, but they don't usually want to rebuild. And the Grizzlies and Pelicans are definitely trying to win. Memphis traded away Steven Adams quietly a few months ago. He was banged up. And yes, Jaren Jackson plays some center for them, but they don't have a guy that's like traditional center that's anywhere near Capela on that roster. So he would obviously help them in that way. New Orleans had Valanciunas last year, who I think Capela is better than anyway. But Valanciunas is a free agent, and they have, look, it's not a secret. The Pelicans have wanted to do something different at center for a while. They're not in love with that option. They might have to bring him back for just like salary reasons, but that could be a change that could happen. Also, they've been tied to a Okongwu in the past, back to the Murray negotiations back in February, but that was a team, of course. And then Matt's report did come before the deal that Chicago made for Giddey. That could change things, but the Bulls, let's just say Vucevic dropped off quite a bit in the last year or 2. He's not very good at this point. The Bulls do have Drummond, but he was a free agent. He's also a free agent right now. So if the Bulls want to keep trying to win, Capela would be an upgrade for them at center. Then there's Washington. They're not trying to win right now, at least not yet. But of course, Travis Schlenk is there. He's not in charge, but he's there, and he wants traded for Clint and is a fan of Clint. Also, the big idea potentially with bringing someone like Clint would be having an adult in the room. The Wizards are a blank slate team. They're very young, rebuilding. And no matter what you think about Clint now, trading for him as the adult in the room for Atlanta worked out beautifully. And they turn a middling first-round pick into a guy who was a huge part of the conference finals run and who's been the starting center for 4+ years. There's that. Now, Washington is a blank slate overall, but they're especially a blank slate at center. They currently have Marvin Bagley, and that's basically it at center. And Bagley was actually quietly okay late in the year, but they're not committed to him, and there's nothing else there really at center. Now, they might draft Alex Sarr, as referenced before, but we'll see on that. I'm not saying they're going to want Capela, but while it doesn't make sense timeline-wise, they don't have a lot of center, and if they get him for cheap, that might be worth exploring if you're the Wizards. I'm not going to do fake trade stuff here, just for the record. I'm not. But there's a way to get Capela to all of these teams. Very quickly, I'm throwing out some names that the Hawks might be interested in. Anyway, New Orleans has stuff to offer. They're not going to offer Dyson Daniels for Capela, I don't think. But maybe there's a way to expand that deal. We'll see. Memphis has Brandon Clark and Luke Kennard making in that like $12 to $14 million range. That could be interesting in a swap to save the Hawks some money. I don't know. They've also been rumored to want to move. Zaire Williams would be a low-cost bet as a former lottery pick wing. Now, he's not been very good, but he's a still young player, etc. Chicago, I have no idea because if I'm the Hawks, I wouldn't touch Vucevic. I wouldn't touch Lonzo Ball's contract. They already traded Caruso. They're not trading Giddey. I don't really know how that's going to work there. That's kind of a harder one to see, but it's conceivable to me. I know Ayo Dosunmu would be really, really good for the Hawks. I don't know if they're trying to trade Ayo Dosunmu for Clint Capela. That'd be a weirdly bad move for the Bulls, I think. But anyway. And then Washington has Rashawn Holmes, who is not as good as Capela, but he is making a lot less money and could be a backup center, I would say, in a cheap role. I know my guy Glenn Willis has referenced Corey Kispert in the past as a guy to potentially nab. That's not crazy. We'll see. Also, Washington has cap space. They could take Clint in a way that other teams might not be able to. Anyway, that's all I have on that. But I want to address it. I held that off for until now because there wasn't like a dead time to talk about it. But it wasn't like anything's active, but Matt threw it out there. I got questions about it, and that's what that is. I still think that there's a decent chance the Hawks move on from either Clint or Onyeka. Obviously, that chance goes even higher if they draft Clingan. Because I've said this before, I will be very surprised if they draft Clingan and then also keep Clint and Onyeka. That would be a weird situation. I don't know why they would do that, because somebody out of those three can't play a lot of minutes, and that doesn't work. So if it's not Clingan, if they draft Ricochet, then they certainly could keep both centers. I'm not advocating for that. In fact, I've advocated the opposite, to break them up at some point in time, whether it's trading Clint or Onyeka. And just to say this out loud, I know I'm the Clint guy. I have never been the don't trade Clint guy. I totally understand why they would trade Clint. He's expiring contract. He's getting older. He's not going to be getting more athletic at this point in time. It's going to go down. Anyway, I'm done rambling on this podcast. It's Sunday morning. Hopefully that's a good catch up for you. I'm sure there will be more intel coming up. I do have a guest that I'm hoping to have on Monday evening into Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. I won't say who it is. I never want to out people that in case something happens, but I'm going to have, at a minimum, 2 more episodes between now and the draft. Maybe more than that, but at least 2 more, I would say, between now and the draft. And then I will be on site at Hawks HQ on Wednesday night. So I can't go live or anything, unfortunately. I know people want that. I will be doing my job and covering the team in person, trying to get intel and press conferences and all that stuff. So I'll be there, and I'll have a podcast late that evening, as you might expect, breaking down all of what transpired. So please subscribe to the show. I would definitely appreciate that. Like and subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching right now on YouTube, go ahead and like right now and subscribe to the show. Plus, on the audio platforms, subscribe, auto download, rate, review. Very much appreciated there. And please catch up on the archive. It has been a lot of fun talking to a lot of different NBA draft folks. It has been wall to wall even before the lottery, talking about the NBA draft. I love it. I'm a draft guy. I've covered the draft for a very long time. It's a passion of mine, and even more intriguing this year with number 1 overall pick. So stay tuned for that, for more coverage this week. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your Sunday into Monday, and we'll see you all next time.